I feel like we've made like a good start, but even in communities that I've experienced and just kind of been a part of, there's a lot of focus on who they'd like to be supporting.
We didn't change the system. Instead, we got little bits of the system altered so that we could maintain our divisions and maintain our lack of access.
Welcome to Essential Stories, an independent grassroots docuseries and live roundtable discussions that give voice to people on the front lines of our world's most pressing social issues.
Women of color have been sidelined and marginalized throughout American history by both the civil rights movement for not being men and from the feminist movement for not being white. Are these margins of non-hetero men at the center of this movement right now? And if not, why? And how do we get there? How would both movements benefit by making non-hetero men the focal point in the fight for social justice?
I think this goes back to the point that we've all kind of been making about who patriarchy prioritizes over the rest, or whoever is considered other. So even in civil rights movements, in the Black Lives Matter movement, the focus generally tends to be on men. And you see this also in media coverage when it comes to people of color who have had their rights violated. More often than not, we hear about the men, even though there are women who are violated every single day. And though it's a great start to have movements that work to dismantle the systems that make this possible, it needs to be part of the mission to bring those who are generally and usually pushed to the back forward. So women, people of other communities, such as the LGBTQI community. And it's a start. Really, I feel like we've made like a good start, but even in communities that I've experienced and just kind of been a part of, there's a lot of focus on who they'd like to be supporting instead of being completely inclusive of the ethnic group you're supposed to be fighting for. There's a lot of conversation about who is worthy enough of support.
I think that Thomas Castile, in his sociological studies in the 70s, he looked at the gay rights movement, he looked at immigrant rights movement, and the women's rights movement. They all converged at the same time and place in San Francisco, but they worked separately. They never combined efforts to look at global rights and looking at combining to usurp the power. Gay men came from a privileged place. Women came from a different sort of privileged place because they came at it as white women, as we've talked about earlier. And the immigrant movement really struggled to get ground. And so everybody got a few rights. Nobody got full inclusion. We didn't change the system. Instead, we got little bits of the system altered so that we could maintain our divisions and maintain our lack of access. There's so much infighting in struggling for recognition and access to resource and wealth, or access to opportunity, and also to not be persecuted, that we truly find ourselves divided within the same cause and the same fight. And only by being completely inclusive may we invite a true revolution in the way that we treat and include all members of our society.
I think that there's a lot of theoretical or there's a lot of effort to involve people of color or Muslims or immigrants or, on a superficial level so that your organization looks good and they can kind of make everyone feel like, well, we're really participating in change over here. But very, very little effort to allow those people to infiltrate the policy making circles or the decision making of the organization, or or to even be a part of those discussions. I mean, I say this as someone who was on the board of Amnesty International for 6 years, and this would happen again and again. So you had a person, say, who was wrongfully imprisoned, who was a prisoner of conscience, and that was our organization's whole thrust, was to work on behalf of these prisoners of conscience. In cases when the prisoners of conscience would be released, we would organize a big event around this person, and they would be fitted on the stage, and we would be doing all of that. But never ever ever was a prisoner of conscience allowed into a board meeting. Never. I almost feel like white people at large, even very well-intentioned white people, imagine there to be like an infinite amount of focal out there, so that they don't abbreviate their own, insistence of being visible and vocal to favor the person of color or the woman of color or the trans person. They don't cede space. And I'm starting to think that unless that happens, because now we've stayed at this place where everybody's supposed to be a part of everything, and we all talk about inclusion, but the main faces are still white. And even the people who are, there's no embarrassment. I write, I'm a journalist. There's no embarrassment on the part of white journalists to write long form stories about, this or that issue that affects Black people. And to me, the fact that there is no embarrassment, I think that that's a problem, because that journalist, for all their good intentions, is missing like 95% of the story.
First off, Rafia, I really want to agree with what you just said about white journalists writing these long form stories about a Black experience, or men writing about a woman's experience. It's always a little bit jarring, because you think, and do you understand this? Why?